Okay, and we're live here, baking with Barry. We're doing Matzah for Jewish Live. Credit to Naomi Bain, my wife and co-founder of our venture, Mitzvah Matzahs, for getting this set up. It's like running a cooking show. So we're going to be making matzah today. Many people have become disempowered and think that you have to buy matzah in a box. That isn't so. One disclaimer, religious disclaimer, there are a lot of different opinions about what flour you can or can't use to make matzah, and that's because the flour might have been sprayed with water or other substances and hasn't necessarily been guarded from moisture. There's something called shmora matzah, means guarded. The Torah in Exodus says, "Ushmartem et hamatzot," and you should guard the matzah. And that means different things. There's debates in the sages. We don't have to get into all of it now. Some say it means you should guard the matzah from the harvest. Others say it means you should guard the matzah to make sure the flour hasn't contacted water from the time of kneading. And others say it means that it just has to be intentional. You have to declare that you're making matzah as opposed to chancing on an unleavened bread. So all of that's a sort of way of background. I'm not here to opine about that, other than to say that according to most opinions, certainly in an odd situation or unusual circumstance, you can use this matzah and just make sure that from the time of kneading, it's okay. The matzah we use in the Mitzvah Matzah's factory is shmora flour. It's guarded from the time of the harvest. Okay, that's the disclaimer. So we're going to be making matzah. Pretty straightforward. The first thing you're going to want to do is declare that you're doing it for the intention of making matzah. This is an intentional food item. So there's a sort of religious practice to making this food, and that's by saying the three words, l'shem matzot mitzvah. That's l'shem matzot mitzvah, or l'shem matzah's mitzvah in the Ashkenazis, and that is for the sake of the mitzvah, the commandment of making matzah. Now, this is a different flour than we've used in our factory, so I'm not sure exactly how it's going to come out. But we've weighed out here about 600 grams or 4 cups of flour. You can see there. And we're using today a King Arthur organic white whole wheat flour. Again, not what we use in our matzah factory, but that's what I've got in my house today. And that might be more similar to what you're going to have. You're not going to have a guarded whole wheat matzah from whole wheat flour from Maine. And so there's about 4 cups of that, 600 grams. And I have here about just under 400 milliliters of water. Another caveat or disclaimer. There's something called mayim shelanu, water that's rested. When they used to get well water, there was a concern it would be heated from the sun or other things. And so it would cause the matzah to rise, and so there was a custom to leave the water out overnight. But according to almost all modern authorities, if you're working with cold, cool tap water, it's not an issue. So you want to be working with the cool water, though. That's the tradition. Now, a few rules, and then we'll get at it, and it's really simple. First rule: it is the bread of affliction. 2 ingredients: water and flour. That's it. That's all we've got going on here. Second rule: 18 minutes from the time that the water hits the flour. We have 18 minutes to get this matzah out of the oven. Third rule: you're going to be wanting to knead the matzah, the flour, the dough, vigorously the whole time. The ideal is to constantly be kneading and to never let it rest. If you're doing multiple batches, you're going to want to clean your equipment to make sure there's no leftover dough. And so that's part of it. And you're also going to want to set an 18-minute timer or have a time-telling device around to get your matzah out of the oven on time. Things you'll need: a mixing bowl, water, a rolling pin could come in handy. You may or may not want a surface of some kind. You could use the counter if you're a kind of sticky baking surface, and a docker. There are fancy metal ones. This is from an online kit to start your own pizza shop. And this puts holes in the matzah, and that prevents air pockets and air bubbles from developing. Also, it's extremely therapeutic. We're back. That was my wife from the other room reminding me that most people do not have a Docker. I'm going to insist you're going to want to get one of these medieval torture devices. It is extremely therapeutic and a healthy way to take out your aggression. But if you do not have a Docker, a fork will do just fine. So you can take a fork and poke holes in your matzah. But get yourself a Docker, you won't regret it. Okay, so with that, I think we're going to go. We've heated our oven here to 550. Now we're making a soft matzah. Some people think this is the Sephardic style matzah, and you can see our website for more about that, or interview on Judaism Unbound. It doesn't have to be that hot. I would recommend heating your oven up to the highest temperature it'll get to, and putting the baking sheet that you're going to use, we're using just a cookie tray there, in to let it get hot. Okay? So you'll pour the water in. Say l'shem matzot mitzvah, and from that time you have 18 minutes to go. You want to knead and see how what the consistency is, and knead vigorously. You just want to keep kneading this until all of the water gets incorporated. And you can judge based on the humidity of the flour, you know, your particular circumstances, if your dough is too dry or too wet. But again, this looks like it's okay for us today. We're using, here again, I got about 600 grams of flour and about 400 milliliters of water. And the harder you work matzah, the better that's going to be. Just come here and get in the video. You can see there, but we've kind of turning it into a dough. We'll see how many this will make, but I would think this will make about six or so 7-inch matzahs. You can make fewer, smaller matzahs, but 6 will be enough for 2 seders. A note while we're doing this about challah, some people have the custom to take an amount out in remembrance of an offering that used to be given to the priest, the Kohen. That only happens with a minimum amount, according to classic Jewish law. Maybe it's about 12 cups of flour, maybe 16. So we're not at enough of that here to make the blessing. We've got a beautiful dough here. This is right on. So that ratio that I suggested will work well with, maybe it's a little wet, but you see that's a nice dough. Then you want to knead it. The more kneading, the better it's going to be. And you want to give it a vigorous, it's a good rule of thumb. Let's give it about 25 or 30 solid kneads until it becomes a little more Play-Doh-like, like some kind of putty. Now, I'm not a baker. I've never successfully baked a loaf of bread. Matzah is foolproof. Anyone can do it. This here is a little wet, so in an ideal world, we might have floured our surface in advance. We didn't do that. Now my hands are a little sticky, but if you're at home, you'll probably want to have a little flour on your tabletop surface. It'll make it easier when you roll the matzah out. One of the reasons why we bake a soft matzah at a slightly lower temperature than a traditional cracker matzah is that in a cracker matzah, if you use that high temperature, it cooks all the way through. It's very thin, but in a soft matzah, you'll sear the outside, but the inside won't fully cook. So you want to cook it at a little bit of a lower temperature so that it cooks evenly through. The ideal, if you have it, most people do not, is to have a perforated pan. I don't know if you can see, but I'm rolling this into like a log now. I've got a nice dough so that I can cut it into even pieces. You might use a knife. To do that, if you have a cutter, but if not, plain old knife. What you want to do maybe is make yourself from these 2 logs of 2, and out of each of those 3, so you'll have 6 total. Split it twice, once into 2 and once into 3. You can be as exact or imperfect as you like, depending on your personality, need for perfection. Okay. Then you're going to take your rolling pin, move the bowl out of the way. So you're going to take one of these and flatten it out a bit. Now, I'm not using the ideal rolling pin here. We're working from our home kitchen, not our factory. The ideal is to use, I think, what they call the French rolling pins. They kind of are gradated with a slope out, but this will do the trick. Get a nice round circle going. The beautiful Matzah maybe there, maybe this is about 1/3 of an inch thick, 1/4 of an inch thick. See that nice Matzah? Make a great Matzah pizza. Have fun with the shape. Then you want to take your docker and just give some holes in each side. Again, the more holes, the better. The fewer the air pockets. And now you see we'll have a Matzah with holes. There. Just put that to the side. And you'll do that with each of your matzahs. Now, in addition to making them in the 18 minutes, it's important that you look for signs of leavening, sort of cracks in the dough or other things that suggest that it has risen. If you've done this correctly, it won't rise at all. There'll be no signs. I would say that's likely what's going to happen. But if your matzah does, on the off chance that it rises, obviously it's not matzah, it's leavened bread. So try again. This is a great activity for the family. Also to get kids involved. Kids love to work with dough. Their hands a little messy. It's a good way to re-empower people. A lot of people make their own challah for Shabbat. For some reason, people think they can't do matzah. They've been taught that it's fraught. It used to be in Europe and in other places, every community would make their own matzah. Okay, so we've got 3 pretty beautiful matzahs there, if I don't say so myself. Now, you don't want any loose flour on them or anything like that, because that might not really cook. So you want to avoid having sort of tons of flour. So you don't want it to be too wet, not too dry. It's kind of a fine balance. But again, this 600 to 400 ratio seems to work pretty well for many kinds of flour. A little bit smaller. Got just 2 left. Just a note while I'm doing this about why it is that matzah became flat and cracker-like. There are kind of 2 reasons. One was the 1880s, 90s, the Manischewitz factory and the Horowitz Margaretin factory. Horowitz was in New York and Manischewitz in Cincinnati got going. And they started making machine matzah, which a lot of people are used to, as opposed to handmade matzah. They wanted those to be shelf stable, not to go moldy or bad like bread. So they started making them cracker-like, and then was a big controversy at the time, especially because, as you see, it has to be an intentional project. So question arose, is it sufficient to have the operator of the machine have intention, l'shem matzah mitzvah, that it's for the sake of matzah, or do you really need a handmade product? Still, many of the Hasidic groups insist on handmade matzah, but most other people have come to rely on the machines, but there's no replacement for making it like by hand. The other reason for the flattening of matzah was to make it less likely to rise, a sort of legal stringency. So two things turned the bread of affliction into the cracker of affliction. You can see these are, still thin, still flat, very dense. Sometimes people say they're like pita, but they're really not. Denser than that. Then you want to take your baking tray out and get your matzahs on. Lay them on kind of flat. I'm only going to fit about 4 on here. I see. Got those in. Maybe I'll get another tray to finish the final 2. See that there? And of course, you want to check to see how much time is left on your 18 minutes. And you'll probably want these to be in the oven, until fully cooked, but not until overcooked, for about between 4 and 8 minutes, depending on the size and temperature of your oven. So we'll see you when they're ready. And we're back. Just taking the matzah out of the oven now. And I see these here. They got a nice golden brown to them. And something you might want to do, just to make sure they're done, you don't want them to be raw, wet. You might want to stick a toothpick in, make sure it comes out clean, that it's cooked, and you kind of see inside. If you're not sure, you can cut one open to test, but you want them not to be raw anymore. And you're also going to want to flip them when you take them out so they don't condense. Maybe move them around and let them cool somewhere with good ventilation. They can get kind of soggy in the cooling procedure. Let's take the last batch out of the oven. Also looking good. Those a little more charred on the other end. As you can see, they got a little sort of golden brown to them, and that's basically making matzah. If you can work with a perforated pan, that'll be even better. So this concludes our initial run of Baking with Barry. Thanks for joining. And if you have any questions, feel free to shoot an email over to info@mitzvahmatzos.org. That's mitzvahmatzos.org. And we'll do our best in this crazy time to help you out. But good luck if you don't have matzah or just decide you want to bake your own this year. Good luck baking matzah.